My name is not important anymore. Names dissolve like morning frost on old stone walls. What matters is that I am 92 years old, and I have arrived at the kind of clarity that only comes when the horizon shrinks to a few remaining seasons. Most people spend their entire lives chasing a feeling of security. They wrap their hands around the nearest warm body, the nearest familiar voice, and they call it wisdom. I am here to tell you, gently but without mercy, that this is the most exquisite trap ever constructed for the human soul. 3 weeks ago, my granddaughter Isolde came to visit me. She is 28, brilliant, with a laugh like water over river stones. She sat beside my window as the late afternoon light turned the room amber, and she wept in a way I had not seen since she was a child who had lost something irreplaceable. She told me she had spent the last 4 years erasing herself. Slowly, deliberately, she had scraped away her own desires, her wish to move abroad and study ecological restoration, her longing to spend a year walking the Camino without a return ticket, and had replaced them with choices that produced nods of approval at Sunday dinners. She had traded her aliveness for belonging. I held her hand, and I told her what I am about to tell you. It was not comfortable, but comfort is the currency of the young, and I am too close to the end of things to spend it carelessly. Here is the truth I have carried for decades, the one I wish someone had carved into the doorpost of every house I ever entered. The people who love you most are not always the people best equipped to guide you. And trusting them with the direction of your life, simply because they are yours by blood or loyalty or shared history, may be the single most elegant way to walk quietly away from your own destiny. I was born in a coastal town where the fog came in so thick in winter you could lose yourself between the front door and the gate. My grandmother Serafina raised me with a kind of fierce, weathered love that I have never found the words to adequately describe. She was not cruel. She was devoted. But she was also a woman shaped entirely by scarcity, by a world that had punished ambition with humiliation and rewarded smallness with survival. When I was 19 and spoke of studying architecture in another city, she wept. She did not weep because she wished me harm. She wept because in her internal geography, distance was synonymous with loss, and change was simply catastrophe wearing a different coat. I stayed, not because I was forced, but because her grief felt like a verdict. I translated her fear into wisdom, the way young people always do with the people they most revere. I told myself she knew something I did not. I told myself her suffering was data. It was not data. It was inheritance, and I carried it like it was mine. This is the quiet devastation that unfolds in ordinary homes across every generation. We do not inherit only our grandmother's earrings or our father's hands. We inherit their defeated assumptions, their abandoned attempts, their maps of a world that no longer exists. And then we navigate by those maps and wonder why we keep arriving at the wrong destinations. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say trust no one, not even family. I am not talking about love. I am not inviting you into coldness. Love is not under interrogation here. What I am placing in the light, turning slowly so you can see every facet, is something more specific. It is the peculiar human habit of mistaking emotional closeness for reliable counsel. Your older brother Aldrich, who teases you about your unconventional ideas, he is not speaking from knowledge. He is speaking from the particular shade of inadequacy he has never been able to name. Your mother, who sighs when you mention leaving the industry you chose for her approval, she is not prophesying your ruin. She is narrating her own unlived chapters. The people who love you are doing something genuinely beautiful and genuinely limiting at the same time. They are loving the version of you that makes them feel safe. They are not always capable of loving the version of you that is still becoming. I learned this slowly, over decades, through a series of moments that each felt like a small stone being removed from a wall I had not realized I was building. The first was in my mid-30s. I had a colleague, a man named Quillan, who was one of those rare human beings that the world seems to produce only occasionally. Incandescent, restless, generous with his attention in a way that made you feel genuinely seen. We had spent 7 years working alongside each other, building something we both believed in. When I was passed over for a position I had devoted 3 years preparing for, Quillan said nothing. Not a word of solidarity, not a glance of acknowledgement across a room full of people who all knew what had happened. Later I discovered that he had, very quietly, positioned himself to benefit from my setback. I did not become bitter. But I did become more awake. I stood in the car park that evening in the gray drizzle, and I felt something in me that I can only describe as the end of a particular kind of innocence. Not the innocence of youth, that had long since departed. The innocence of assuming that closeness confers loyalty. I had given Quillan the interior rooms of my confidence, the unguarded places. He had carried them lightly and deposited them where they were useful to him. He was not a monster. He was a person, doing what frightened people do. The second moment came in my late 50s, during a season of significant loss. I turned to my family during a period when I could barely locate myself, and I discovered something I had not expected. They were present, warmly, abundantly present. They came with meals and phone calls and the kind of sustained attention that should have been healing. And in the middle of all that presence, they slowly, lovingly began to rebuild me in their own image. The grief they helped me process was a grief shaped by their own fears. The recovery they guided me toward was a recovery that looked like the version of me they were most comfortable with. Calm, contained, legible. I allowed it. For a long time, I allowed it. And then one morning, I woke up and realized I had been reassembled incorrectly, with someone else's blueprints. The philosophers I returned to in my 60s, not only the Stoics, though they come close to the bone, understood something that most modern advice forgets. The interior of a human being is sovereign territory. It is not a shared space. It cannot be governed by committee, no matter how tender the committee members or how genuine their intentions. Epictetus walked out of slavery with nothing but the absolute bedrock certainty that his judgment was his own, that no one could reach into the locked chamber of his reason and rearrange the furniture. This is the practice, not detachment, not the theatrical loneliness of someone who has decided people are disappointing and retreated into performance. The actual practice is something far more demanding and far more alive. It is choosing every day to be the final authority on the questions that belong to your own life. It is listening to everyone, absorbing the love and the concern and even the criticism, and then walking alone into the room where the real decision gets made, and trusting the person you find there. I want to tell you several things I wish I had understood at 30. The first is that longing is not foolishness. When something persists in you, when it surfaces again and again, like a word you cannot stop hearing, this is not fantasy or immaturity. It is information. People who have made their peace with their own disappointment will often dress this information up as naivety on your part. They will tell you the world is harder than you think. They are correct that the world is hard. They are wrong that hardness is a reason to abandon the attempt. The second is that people do not remain static. The friend who is steady today will be altered by the next decade in ways neither of you can predict. Prosperity changes people in underestimated directions. So does grief. So does the slow erosion of hope that certain kinds of monotony produce. If you have built your sense of safety on the constancy of another person's character, you have built on sand, and you will feel the shake when the tide comes. This is not cynicism. It is simply the ecology of human beings. We are organisms in time. We change or we calcify, and neither outcome guarantees you the person you started with. The third is that seeking approval from those who love you is an act of quiet self-betrayal dressed as loyalty. It feels like love to make them proud. It feels like generosity to bend your aspirations toward their comfort zone. It is neither. It is a slow disappearance. You vanish incrementally, politely, in small daily surrenders, each one so reasonable in isolation that you barely notice the cumulative cost until one day you look in a mirror and struggle to find yourself. My granddaughter Isolde sat beside my window and wept, and I recognized myself in her with such precision it was almost unbearable. The same luminous potential, organizing itself around someone else's definition of safe. I told her, the only map that belongs to you is the one you draw with your own uncertainty. Every other map is a hand-me-down. I have loved people in my 92 years with a fullness that I would not subtract a single ounce of, even knowing what it cost. I loved my grandmother Serafina and I forgave her long before she died, for the ways her fear became my walls. I understood eventually that she had given me everything she had, and that everything she had was shaped by a world that had asked nothing of women except their diminishment. Her love was total. Her guidance was limited by what she had been permitted to imagine. I loved Quilon, and I forgave him too in time. The way you forgive a man for being human in the particular way that hurt you. He was not equipped to be what I had unconsciously elected him to be. That was my error, not his. Here is what I want to leave with you. If you have come this far and something in you is still listening, the construction of an interior life that does not depend on external validation is not a cold project. It is the warmest thing I know. When you stop requiring people to be your architects, you can finally receive them as they actually are. Imperfect, exhausted, trying, loving you in the fractured, partial way that human beings love, which is the only way there is. Build something inside yourself that cannot be voted down by the people at your table, however dear they are. Not a fortress of contempt, a sanctuary of discernment. A place where you can sit with the largest questions of your life and trust the voice you hear there, even when it is inconvenient. Even when it would disappoint people who have been good to you, even when it asks you to become someone slightly unfamiliar to everyone who thinks they know you. 92 years have passed through me, like weather through an open window. I have watched people I cherished crumble under the weight of lives they never chose. I have watched people of ordinary talent do extraordinary things because they stopped asking permission. The difference was not intelligence or fortune or favorable circumstance. The difference was a willingness to treat their own judgment as credible. You are allowed to do that. You are, in fact, obligated to. Love the people in your life with an open hand and a full heart. Sit with them at tables. Walk beside them in their grief. Celebrate what they build. But when the hour arrives, and it will arrive, quietly, without announcement, the way all important hours do. When the hour arrives to decide what your one life will be made of, go alone into the room of your own knowing. Lock the door gently, and trust what you find there.